any less power for them.
I also think this whole thing of microaggressions that you talk about in the film is really interesting because so many people are aware that they've got to be more careful perhaps in the way they talk and so on and so on. And they try really hard. I'm talking about older generation people perhaps who never had to give this much thought. And they're really keen to try and say the right thing. And these microaggressions, where are you from? Where were you born? Do you speak good English? This was the University of Minnesota. These are all deemed microaggressions. You're Asian, how come you're not good at maths? University of Edinburgh. I don't see colour. National Education Association, because apparently denies a person's of colour's racial, ethnic experiences. I mean, it's all just garbage.
Matt Walsh appeared on Piers Morgan Uncensored and didn't just take on the woke crowd. He ended up clashing with Piers Morgan himself. Things got a little tense when Piers started pressing Matt, and Matt had no problem pushing back and putting Piers in his place. Let's check out this clip where Matt Walsh and Piers Morgan go head-to-head on his own show.
Unless it's intended in a derogatory way or a sneering manner, none of those things are aggressive. They're just questions people would ask. I mean, the whole royal family row, for example, about the potential skin colour of Prince Harry's son, Archie, was apparently based around one of the members of the royal family saying, given Meghan Markle's parents, one's white, one's black, what skin colour could the baby be? That's not a microaggression. It's not an aggression of any kind. Unless the question was delivered, I hope it's not going to be too dark. That's a microaggression. That's racism. But to simply say, by the way, given the parents are different colours, what colour might the baby... What's wrong with that? Why wouldn't every family in that position ask that question?
Right. I mean, and a lot of this stuff, asking someone where they're from, as you pointed out, is just that's just showing an interest in someone, that's being polite.
Right.
But part of this is that it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. They set it up so it's a lose-lose, because with many of these so-called microaggressions, well, if you do the thing, you're racist, you're microaggressive. But if you don't do it, you could also be racist, because if you don't recognize that someone's from a different culture and you don't acknowledge it at all, well, now you've otherized them, you've excluded them, you've made them feel like they don't exist or something. You haven't affirmed their existence. You haven't taken an interest in their culture. That could also be racist. Really, it just depends on that person. It's like, how do they perceive it? Do they want you to ask, or do they not want you to ask? And you're supposed to know that going in.
Right.
And if you do the wrong thing, then it's automatically racist, apparently.
One of the criticisms you've had is this whole concept of unconscious bias and so on, that actually a lot of people who are genuinely racist don't think they're racist. I mean, that is a real phenomenon, right? I know people who say racist stuff who would deny till their cows come home that they're actual racists, but I hear them. They are. They really are, I guess, unconsciously racist. How would you describe it?
But I don't know. I think that if you genuinely don't think that you are racist, then you're not, because that's not in your mind. It's not what's motivating.
But do you think
now,
that's
there could
right?
be people,
See, on that
I think
point,
maybe what you're talking.
I would slightly pick you up on that, because I know people who may not think they're racist, but they definitely say stuff that is racist. They're judging people negatively from their skin colour.
Well, I think you could have someone who is racist and denies it.
What Matt Walsh is basically saying is that if you truly don't believe you're racist and don't treat people differently based on their skin color, then you're not racist. The idea he's challenging is that some people claim not to be racist, but still make assumptions about others because of their race. If that's the definition of racism, that everyone has preconceived notions about others based on race, then honestly, everyone would be considered racist. Think about it. Stereotypes exist for a reason, and while not every one of them is true, many are rooted in cultural differences. Every culture has unique habits or tendencies. For example, there are things certain groups tend to do more than others. It's just part of human nature and culture. These observations aren't inherently malicious. They're just part of how we notice differences. Matt Walsh is essentially saying that if you don't focus on race in your interactions, then you wouldn't discriminate based on it, because you're not even thinking about it in that way. The problem, though, is that it's hard to imagine anyone never considering race at all. People naturally notice differences. It's part of being human. That doesn't mean it's always negative or harmful, though. Recognizing differences between races and cultures doesn't have to be a bad thing. Humans are naturally tribal, and noticing patterns or tendencies in different groups is just part of how we've always interacted with the world. The key is how we act on those observations. Discrimination becomes an issue only when it turns harmful or unfair. Recognizing differences doesn't have to be taboo. It's about what we do with that awareness.
Racist people in the world of all colors, of all races, by the way. Anyone can be racist, and certainly some of them will deny that they are. Like, that is a thing that happens, sure. But the point is that there's only one authority. There's only one person in the universe who's an authority on what's in your mind. There's only one person who can really speak to that authoritatively, and that is you. And so if you genuinely don't feel any animosity to people based on their race, then you're not racist. You might have you have many other flaws, I'm sure. You might even believe things stereotypically about races, but that's not racist in and of itself. And you're the only one who could speak to that. So if someone tells me they're not racist, then I'll just take them at their word on that. I'm not interested. I can't read their mind, and that's all that we can do. And then I'm just going to go on and live my life. I mean, I think that's the best way to approach most of this.
Do you think America's becoming less racist decade by decade by decade?
I think it was. I think we kind of talk about in the movie that, in the 90s, and the 90s was not a racial utopia in the United States. I realize that OJ, race riots, that sort of thing did happen. But I will say that just anecdotally, growing up in the 90s, very, very quite diverse area, going to public school and all that, a lot of different races. It was not a major focus. And I think that we're I do think we're going backwards in a lot of ways, that it's now there's a resentment, there's a suspicion there to a much greater degree. 15, 20 years ago. And again, this is all engineered. I think this is all quite intentional.
The George Floyd murder features in the film, obviously. The reaction to that was extraordinary, unprecedented. Could you see good and bad in that reaction?
Hard to see any good in it. I saw a lot of bad. I mean, I saw whole communities being burned down. I saw innocent people being victimized en masse across the country. I saw just people losing it was hysteria. I mean, what we saw was mass hysteria, and the response to that incident was not even close to reasonable. There's not any kind of reasonable conversation about it from the very beginning, and I don't think anything good came of it. And that in and of itself is not responsible alone for a lot of the racial insanity we see today, because a lot of it was already happening. I mean, BLM existed years prior to that, but it certainly didn't help. I think that's for sure.
What do you guys think? Is racism improving in America? Personally, I think racism still exists, but I also believe it's getting better overall. The problem is, I don't think woke ideology is helping at all. In fact, I think it's making things worse. It feels like naturally racism was fading over time, but now with this push to constantly label people as racist just because they're white, it's creating more division. When people are told they're racist no matter what they do, it can make them think, well, if I'm going to be called racist anyway, why bother trying? That kind of thinking just fuels the problem. At the end of the day, racism doesn't make sense. It's illogical to hate someone based on their skin color. But if we redefine racism to include noticing patterns or cultural trends, then technically, everyone could be called racist. Recognizing differences between cultures or groups doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just acknowledging reality. Ignoring those differences can actually hold people back in some ways. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Who do you think made the stronger points in this debate? Matt Walsh or Piers Morgan? Drop your take in the comments below.